Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Welcome to the Center for Strategic and International Studies and to the 9th Annual Transatlantic Forum on Russia. My name is Heather Conley. I'm Senior Vice President for Europe, Eurasia, and the Arctic here at CSIS, and we are delighted to be in partnership with the Center for Polish-Russian Dialogue and Understanding in Warsaw, Poland. And my dear colleague, Director of the Center, Ernest Wyszkiewicz, is with us today as a co-partnership to provide this transatlantic forum on Russia. We held our first session a few weeks ago that looked at governmental policy towards Russia. We were pleased to host U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Steve Biegun and the Undersecretary of State in the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs to have a wide-ranging discussion on foreign and security policy. Today, we're going to take a deeper dive into Russia's internal political dynamics. What is civil society saying? How are the politics either addressing or not addressing the average needs and concerns and views of Russian citizens? We have an enormous amount to talk about today, and we want to bring you into this conversation. So if you go on to our event page, there's a button that you can press for live questions. Please send us your questions because we're going to incorporate those into the conversation. So without further ado, Ernest, let me turn this over to you to say a few words about the important work that you're doing in Warsaw and to introduce our first speaker. Thank you again, and welcome to the Transatlantic Forum on Russia. Ernest?
Thank you, Heather. It's a pleasure to see you again. It's a pleasure to see all of you for our second meeting during our online Transatlantic Forum on Russia. The center that I have a privilege to head for 10 years is trying to foster dialogue between Poles and Russians, Poland and Russia. So it's a challenging job, but we try our best. There are two pillars of our work, actually. It is dialogue with Russians and dialogue about Russia. So we have this, we're lucky enough today to have both, actually. So excellent Russian speakers and Russia as a major topic of our debate. Without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, who is Denis Volkov, Deputy Director of Levada Analytical Center. Levada Center is a Russian non-governmental research organization, one of the largest in Russia in the field of public opinion research. The center conducts regularly sociological research, investigates changes in Russian society on a daily basis for many years. So we will have the opportunity to have a deep probe into what Russians think about themselves and the state of affairs. So my first question is quite obvious to you, Denis. If you could please give us some basic baseline assessment of societal attitudes or moods in the context of this year, annus horribilis. I mean, the COVID, economy, stagnation, constitutional vote, local elections, and last but not least, the Navalny case. What actually are the main drivers of Russian public opinion right now? Denis, please.
Thank you, Ernest. Dear colleagues, great to be with you. I would say that, of course, COVID is a big story, but I would say in our figures, we see that in the short term, it has a rather limited effect. Because in the very beginning, in spring this year, it seemed like we are in the beginning of a big crisis like 2008 and 9. But sometimes past the quarantine was over, and now the moods are more relaxed, and we have all the ratings and assessments of situation went down in spring, but they are more or less back to pre-COVID level. I would say that COVID will have more profound long-term effect when the economy, the effect on the economy will take place, and it will affect the well-being of Russians. But in the short term, there is not so big effect. I think the more profound changes we had during previous years. One is that the Crimea effect is already over, and we do not see such big ratings of authorities of Putin. The pension reform, there was a very big event that shaken Russians' belief in government, and of course the long-term deterioration of living standards, which we saw for more than 6-7 years, I think now. This, I think, the major effect on the overall attitudes and the assessment of situation. And what we have now is a rather divided country, no more supermajority that we had 3-4 years ago. And I would say that 1/3 of the people in Russia are critical towards the government. 2/3 are more or less pro status quo, but only half of them, I think, 1/3 are true Putin supporters. But we see that now increasingly people are saying why they support Putin, those who support. It's because there's no alternative, not because Putin has done something. It is already in the past. And also because people believe that there will be no changes under Putin. And those who are in favor of Putin, it's good for them because they fear changes and because they think that every change in Russia is for worse. But again, I will say that there's no supermajority, and increasingly, the government has to not only to mobilize their supporters, bring them to ballot boxes during constitutional vote, during the elections in September and future elections next year, but also to demobilize the critics, to fracture all the critical parts of society, just to make them passive, make them inactive. And we saw it very well in the constitutional vote when all the polls showed that there were no majority inside the society about these amendments. There was about 40% were in favor of them. About a third of the country was against them. And what Kremlin do is they mobilize the supporters, absolutely demobilize the critics. And I think in this new reality, this will be the main strategy of the regime, just to ensure they have the necessary support. Just a few words about who are supporters, who are critics. I will end here. So supporters, the older generations, those who are dependent from the state, those who have limited desires about their living standard and so on, and those who think of voting as their duty to the state. So when state asks to pay their debt, their duty, they go and vote. So older generations, so-called budgetniki, who depend from the state and wait from the state the increasing of their fortunes, and also the TV audience. TV audience very important for the regime right now, and there is now we see that in the internet, much more people are critical. They listen to different points of view. They listen to such people as Dut, Navalny, other independent politicians, and they and YouTube, Instagram, this visual platform already provides some competition to the TV. Also, who is more critical? Those who are independent. People such entrepreneurs and those who suffered actually during the COVID more. and also younger generations. For many years in our polls, we saw that the youngest group was the so-called Putin generation, that they were the most adherent supporters of the regime. So no more, no more. It changed, and though of course there are a big share of young people who do support the majority, the government, they're no more the best supporters of Putin. This is changing. This is changing. So we are now see some changes in the attitudes, though still the situation looks stable, but there are changes going on inside society.
Denise, thank you so much. There is so much to unpack in all of that rich data. Particularly, we wanted to spend a little time focusing on what young people, those under 30s year olds, how they think. Well, let's turn to our other distinguished speaker. Andrei Kolesnikov is a senior fellow and chair of the Russian Domestic Politics and Political Institutions program at the Carnegie Moscow Center. Andrei also works with the Gaidar Institute for Economic Policy and is a frequent contributor to many of the major press outlets, independent press outlets in Russia. Andrei is a journalist by training himself, having served as managing editor of Novaya Gazeta newspaper, as well as the deputy editor-in-chief of Izvestia in the New York Times. So Andrei, we are delighted to have you. So with Denise's sort of the underlying shifts of where Russian society is more relaxed, obviously great concern about the economy, but it seems maybe the Russian people are a little bit more relaxed, but the regime certainly doesn't feel relaxed to me as it's looking forward to next year's Duma elections, unclear when they will be held. So help us understand the politics of this. How is the Russian regime responding to these political trends? And what do you suspect are going to be some of the new trends coming forward in this very important 2021 election year with all the changes to the Russian constitution? Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to talk here. I would say the first point is that we are living in the authoritarian state, and this is a full-scale authoritarian state, not simply hybrid or something like that. This is really matured authoritarianism. It's evident, and the only goal of Putin and Putin's elites is to keep themselves in power. So in that sense, they are following attentively some trends in the society and trying to find the ways to the hearts of people. They're doing it in a, let's say, partly Soviet way, because they believe in state. Previous generation believed in a state socialism. This generation believes in state capitalism, cronyist capitalism. So the only goal is to get more money into the budget, then to redistribute this money among different groups of society. And until the year 2018, until the pension reform, retirement reform, there was kind of a social contract between the elites and average Russians. We are feeding you, we are contributing benefits to you at the minimum level, and you are voting for us, and you do not disturb us, do not intervene in our private affairs, in redistributing the national wealth among us. So we will share with you some portions of this national wealth. But now the situation is much harder for the regime, because we are witnessing the reawakening of the civil society. We must differ civil society and political opposition. These are different things, because political opposition is fighting for power. We are naming always some persons like Navalny in that context. And civil society is simply reacting to the violation of different kind of constitutional rights, ecological rights, electoral rights, any kind of rights, constitutional rights, which have its origins in the Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Russian Federation. So in that sense, the regime must be ready for any scenario. And one of the factors which were important for Putin and Kremlin were protests in Belarus, which demonstrated the possible scenario for the year 2024. And this regime must be ready for everything. On the one hand, we are witnessing a kind of a complacency syndrome in Kremlin. Putin sincerely thinks that everything is more or less okay, and with economy as well. But on the other hand, they see some bad signs in a civil society. They're trying to be prepared for the situations like in Khabarovsk. This is, let's say, the revolution of dignities. This is not a struggle for power. This is a struggle for restoration of violated rights. In this case, electoral rights. So it is very interesting to compare Belarusian protests and protests in Khabarovsk. They have a lot in common, but at the same time, I don't think that we must say that this kind of protests could cover the whole Russia. It's absolutely impossible in a situation of total indifference. But nevertheless, it was absolutely unexpected for Kremlin, I mean, this kind of protest. But people in Kremlin are sophisticated enough to manage different kind of situations. If we'll take, for instance, the last case of significant protests in Kushtau in Bashkortostan, it was a small upheaval because of the activity of a mining company which tried to intervene into ecological rights of people. These people defending their mountain, which is important from the cultural point of view in Bashkortostan, and so on and so forth. The first step of authorities was to react, to make business as usual, to suppress this protest. But Putin was sophisticated enough to become a defender of these protesters. He said that it was a wrong privatization, and if the company could be a state company, it will be okay, everything okay with the handling this problem. So he demonstrated that he is ready to work with the civil society. And Kremlin is ready to work with the civil society, to mirror the civil society, to imitate artificial civil society. And this is the way how Kremlin will behave in the future. But at the same time, for the organizations, for people who are intransigent, here is another strategy to suppress them, to create new legal initiatives, new legislation, for instance, among foreign agents, like it was a week ago. So different instruments which can help Putin and his regime to survive. But again, I can only repeat that Kremlin must be ready, and it is trying to be ready for different scenarios. I will stop myself here.
Thank you, Andrei. As a follow-up to what Denis said, and to link it to actually what you said about this major authoritarianism that is in Russia right now, we have a whole bunch of people actually entering their political life now without any other person than Putin in mind as a head of the state, with a quite frozen political system. And on the other hand, we heard from Denis that these young people differ from their older friends and colleagues in terms of their perception of world in Russia. Could you please, Denis, dive into this generational differences? What do young Russians feel about Единая Россия, Navalny, this lack of alternatives stereotype that we have? What do they think about the situation in the country right now? Because these are the people that will be shaping the Russia in years to come.
Yes, thank you for this question. We do observe changes in young people's attitude towards the regime, towards what's going on in the country. But we should mind that the youngest age group, they not very much interested in politics. So we see that they're no more the biggest fans of Vladimir Putin, but at the same time, we do not see any increase in their desire to vote. The youngest age group is itself very small, and it is, I think, more important what are older groups, those who are from 30 to 40 years old, will think about the situation. They are also disillusioned by what's going on. Though, again, as I said, many of them are still support Единая Россия, but still, I think the biggest support of the regime of Единая Россия, of Putin personally, are older people who are already they're in their pension age, and they just would like state to support them. So we see these changes in the youngest age group as they are using internet, such platforms as YouTube increasingly, and in this sense, they're already not dependent that much on TV. At least in the biggest cities, they do not depend on TV anymore. But still, maybe in smaller towns, they do watch TV. But it is changes for the maybe not so long future, but not for next year. We should to wait as the youngest age group mature, as they get themselves interested in politics. We should wait for those who are about 35, 40, familiarize more themselves with the internet. We should wait for them to trust internet more, for these changes that are already happening to influence the political sphere. Because right now, what we see, it is the older generations who set the political scene in the elections. These are dependent from the state, who expect Putin and the state to help them, and who have this duty to vote. So they're the biggest share of voters right now, and say they decide what the political scene will look like. So we should wait for a younger generation to not to only change their attitudes towards the state and towards what's going on, but to change their attitudes towards political activity. But it will not happen in 1 or 2 years. I think it's a more medium term range, at least 5, 6, 7 years, until we see some bigger changes in political behavior.
Andre, let me turn to you. And I found your opening comments so interesting, just even using the term, the revolution of dignity, which speaks to the Ukrainian revolution of dignity and what's going on in Belarus. And your concept, historically, we've talked about Russia's employment of so-called managed democracy. What you're suggesting is sort of a managed civil society where there is an attempt to sort of look like there's an active, but again, suppression. So fantastic reflections there. So you and your colleagues at the Carnegie Moscow Center have done a fantastic job helping us understand these various political camps are factions that are at play through all of this, and clearly are gearing up for the Duma elections next year. They want to make sure they have that 2/3 majority to ease this transition and try to make the 2024 not a bumpy year. I'm hoping that you can help us unpack a little of these camps. You, in the joint paper that you wrote with Denise, talked about these, the loyalists, you talked about the liberals, you talked about the traditionalists. Not everyone is being complacent at the moment about political futures. They are wanting to solidify their own ascendancy, particularly camps that are focusing on, nationalism, traditionalism, conservatism. I'm hoping that you could help us understand a little bit about these camps and then how they are either working with Russian public opinion, trying to change it, or trying to steer it in their own preferred direction.
Yeah, this is such a broad topic. I must say primarily that Putin is an autocrat. Again, I must stress this point. And when somebody is asking, Putin has very high approval rating, electoral rating of trust, but he must have this kind of ratings because he's not a normal Western democratic leader. He's an autocrat. He needs people's love or people's indifference, which is also one of the cornerstones of this regime. If you are indifferent, you will not be politically active. So, but at the same time, he is very good political manager. As I said, he's combining suppression and gambles with the civil society. He still needs elections. He still needs electoral support for himself during presidential elections and for his party, United Russia Party, which is not party at all, but one of the instruments of Kremlin to maintain a normal level of support for Putin's regime. In that sense, he needs parliamentary elections. We are going to these elections. Formally, this is the main event of the next year. And the regime is trying really to be prepared for it. But at the same time, generally, it doesn't change anything because given this very low level of political activity in a political sense, I don't touch in that sense civil society. I'm saying about political opposition. I would say that United Russia Alice will be still the main party in the system. It will be supported to the lower degree, but will be supported because of such a, let's say, new phenomenon. Here is a big difference between people's sentiments, real sentiments, and their electoral behavior in the circumstances of this regime. If people are coming to the polling stations, they are voting for the authorities, mostly. Sometimes they demonstrate their discontent using such a tool as protest voting, but primarily at the level of regions, not at the federal level. So if you're coming to vote for the president, you will vote for Putin. If you're coming to vote for any parliamentary party, you will vote for United Russia, being not so content with their work. Or you will vote for the Communist Party if you have leftist views, more or less leftist, socialist. And you will vote for LDPR party if you are supporting far-rightist ideas like these populist ideas. And this system is still workable, but the main problem is not the problem of 2021, but the problem of the time after the parliamentary elections, when this regime will have to re-articulate, refresh the party system. It is old enough, and there is a big need to recreate this system. But at the same time, the system is like this. In reality, Putin is a president of a state-dependent population. This is a share of, let's say, 70% of the population. In that sense, there is no need to play the games with the minorities. It became evident in recent years, and Putin is trying to support only the groups of his own supporters, budget-dependent people, so-called budgetniki, state-driven middle class like siloviki, people who are serving in the army, in secret services, and so on and so forth. This is a big part of the population. And this techniques is workable. What is concerning, let's say, the administrative part of it, Putin is trying to create a new class of new technocrats, more or less young, in their 40s or 50s, who are extremely loyal to the political regime, and they are not politicians, but at the same time, they're trying to do all the best, all that they can do as technocrats. From the point of view of Putin, this is an actionable model, and as we see, our new prime minister, this is the model of this technocrat of a new kind. In that sense, again, the system can survive some years until the next presidential elections, but again, the system is trying to be prepared for any kind of unexpected protests or unexpected upheavals, something like that.
Thank you, Andrei. If I may just do a little follow-up to Belarusian question. Actually, we have been living in this myth that Belarus will be looking like it looked like a year ago for eternity. Suddenly in August, it turned out that the society that we thought is, let's say, by nature passive, raised its head and actually told his leader to leave, which he didn't do actually, but lost legitimacy. How those events actually resonate in Russian society and also in Russian elites? What do Russians think about what's happening in this brotherly nation nearby?
Okay, maybe I start. Well, for a couple of months, Belarus was the main event that Russians were looking at. Actually, it is no more, and happenings in Karabakh shaded the Belarus situation. And though we saw such a big interest, not many people were to show sympathy with protesters, and the country was divided almost evenly. Those who were saying that they're actually a little bit more people were saying they're supporting Lukashenko. And again, there were people who support Putin here in Russia, older generations dependent on the state and on state television. Younger groups were more they were more ready to sympathize with the protesters, but still not many people feel emotionally didn't emotionally invest into this situation. But what was happening for sure that many of those people, even those who were watching through TV, state-run TV, they were making parallels. And even those who supported Putin were saying, well, you know, maybe we like Lukashenko, and actually maybe we like Putin, but they're too for too long they're in power, and maybe they should change. Somebody should come with a fresh face. So there were these parallels, but at the same time, the absolute majority in Russia was saying that no matter who is going out to protest, they will not change anything, and the authorities will have their way. And it is the same what Russians think about the protest inside Russia. They can sympathize with people who are protesting in Bashkortostan about Khushtal, in Khabarovsk region, but at the same time they say, Well, we sympathize, but they will not change the situation. They will not change the authority. Maybe they can get something from the authorities, but not change the authorities.
Denise, thank you. I want to bring in some of our great questions from our audience. Andre, for you, one of the audience members said, we're really seeing one tactic of the regime's mobilization is the use of patriotism, and that patriotism is for younger generation. In some ways, this is a revitalization of Soviet tactics, of Soviet youth, but patriotism. If you could help us understand how patriotism and youth and mobilizing, maybe not giving up completely on the younger generation. And then Denise, we had a question for you. So after Andre answers that question, let me turn to you. And it's a very specific question about how the legislation that defined the Levada Center as a foreign agent, undesirable, how has that impacted your work, affected your work? And quite frankly, to both of you, we've seen so many constitutional legal changes come through this year. If they're the ones that for you are very important, there's lots of speculation over recent changes about granting immunity to President Putin and his family well after he leaves, which has sort of set off some speculation about his own long-term plans as remaining leader. So just wondering if you could offer any reflections on important legal constitutional changes that you impact you or affecting you. Andre, let me let you take the patriotism question and then the constitutional change question, and then Denise, I'll turn to you.
Yes, on the one hand, all these constitutional amendments were not so significant for the majority of Russians because they didn't read the constitution ever, at least the majority. And it means that they accepted the idea of more patriotic points in the constitution, adjustments in the constitution, as something more or less unknown, but they maintained this idea of this bias to historical patriotism as a support of our great victory in the great patriotic war. This is one of the most important points. I mean, historical policy is the main tool right now for Putin to manage hard situations in the society. And this is a substitution for military and foreign policy victories, which are not so significant since the year 2018, since the year of the pension reform. Military victories were extremely efficient in terms of raising support for Putin. We remember the times of Georgian War of 2008, one of the biggest waves of support for Putin and Medvedev. And for sure, the year of the annexation of Crimea, 2014, when Putin has got 80+% of the support, I mean, approval rating, the answer to the question, do you approve the activity of the President Vladimir Putin? But after that, any kind of military victories in Syria and Libya or somewhere else, they don't work at the same to the same extent as it was even 2 years ago. The ratings are indifferent for this kind of victories. Yes, people want their country to be strong. This is kind of an imperative, but at the same time, we have achieved this goal. We are great again. So now let's focus on something more material like food, clothes, and normal life. But at the same time, as a cornerstone of Russian consciousness, patriotism is extremely important in different dimensions. One of the dimensions is nationalism, European style, let's say, but at the same time, we are the former empire. In that sense, the imperialistic sentiments are extremely important for people right now. Because of that, the annexation of Crimea was so popular, because of these pains of lost empire. This society, Russian society, is an aged society. In that sense, the regime is working with aged generations and with middle-aged generations successfully. But for the youth, they have also some, let's say, gifts, primarily the glorious past again, and the explanations of the history from Putin himself. Putin is the main historian in our country, and he suggests official versions of the history, all his well-known interventions with the explanation of the need of Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, of our previous glory, and even glory of Stalin, which is for the majority of Russians is a symbol of law and order. Paradoxically, they don't want to live in times of Stalin, but they are ready to assess this figure is very important example of good governance, let's say. So in that sense, this pillar is still workable. Putin has to use it frequently. And again, I must stress it, the main tool for the moment is historical policy.
Thank you, Andre. Denise.
Well, speaking about this foreign agent law, well, of course, it makes our life harder, such organization like ours. First of all, because there is, for absolute majority of population, this foreign agent words, they have unequivocal association with a spy or a traitor. So they unmistakably chose these words. And it is made to discredit such organizations who have any connection with the West, with outside of the country, because many in Russia unwelcome any interference in the domestic issues. So the authorities play with this notion. It is also makes the well, our situation, and not ours, situation precarious, because anytime you can be checked, you can be now with these new changes in the law, there's much more opportunities for organization to be closed. But I would say it is more aimed at such civic organization, major civic organizations like Memorial, who work with many citizens, who try to educate, who try to reach out to wider audiences. It is for these organizations primarily, I would say, these limitations and these rules that make the life of these organizations harder and harder every year, actually. And also, I can mention that there is almost well, a ban on publishing the results of independent polls. You will not find the results of our polls in on TV for many years already, but now even in newspapers who until recently were independent. And we see that it's not only about the foreign agent law, it's about the pressure mounting on independent parties, on mass media, newspapers, independent news channels, and civil society as well. So it's a bigger pressure. It's not only about the foreign agent law, of course.
Denise, thank you so much. But please rest assured the Levana Center has a huge following, and we so appreciate your survey work and the insights and the analysis that you and Andre and other incredibly important analysts help us understand all of this. Well, it seems extraordinary that 45 minutes has already gone, and we feel like we've just scratched the surface of so many issues, highlighting the fact that although there's going to be much focus on next year's Duma elections, to Andre's point, in fact, perhaps the real contest begins after those elections, and a new political refreshment, and how the views of citizens respond to that. Let me conclude by, again, thanking our dear partners, the Center for Polish-Russian Dialogue and Understanding. Ernest, thank you so much for being my co-partner in this conversation. For Andrei and Denise, thank you so much for your very insightful comments. Denise and Andrei have recently co-authored an important paper. It's in Russian, but in some ways touches on so many of the issues. It just was released a few days ago. We commend that to you. And please join us for our third session of the Transatlantic Forum on Russia on Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to talk about Russia's energy futures, which of course impacts on much of the conversation today regarding Russia's economic future and how the state resources are able to be accumulated and potentially redistributed, and talking about Europe's energy transition and how much that will challenge Russia's energy future. So please join us for our third session on Thursday. And with that, again, our great thanks to our partners, to Andrei, to Denise, to our wonderful staff at CSIS that helps us organize these important events. We wish you a great day. Be safe, be well, and we'll see you on Thursday. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Heather.